Most people think fruit trees only go into the ground in spring, right after the last frost, while the whole season still stretches out ahead of them. So when August arrives, they close the garden center tab and wait until next year. But for container-grown trees, that assumption costs an entire season of root growth you will never get back. Across most of the continental U.S., roughly zones 5 through 9, August soil is still holding on to summer's warmth, and that warmth is exactly what a young tree needs to push roots deep before it goes dormant for winter. If you're in a colder zone, or if you're planting bare root stock instead of a container tree, you may be better off waiting for the traditional dormant season window this fall or winter, and we'll flag that where it matters. Some of the trees on this list are quietly becoming the most requested plants at nurseries across the country, not because they're trendy for no reason, but because they solve a real problem: small yards, short patience, or a taste for fruit you simply cannot buy at a grocery store. And the tree in the #1 position is planted first on this list for a reason. Its roots are more sensitive to a late start than almost anything else here. Let's begin. Number 1. Pawpaw.
Pawpaw opens this list because of everything here. It has the least room for error when it comes to timing. It grows a long taproot early on, and that root resents being disturbed once it's established. So a young tree needs as many warm weeks as possible to anchor itself before winter arrives. In colder zones, roughly 6 and below, that means getting it in the ground by mid to late August at the latest if you're planting a container tree, or simply waiting for spring instead of pushing a fall planting too close to your first frost date. In warmer zones, 7 and up, you have a bit more room to work with. Pawpaw has spent the last few years becoming one of the most talked about native fruit trees in the country, nicknamed the American mango for a flavor that genuinely surprises first-time tasters. Tropical, banana-like, and completely unexpected from a tree that grows wild across the eastern half of the country. Planted in a spot with partial shade for its first 2 years, pawpaw naturally grows as an understory tree, and young seedlings can scorch badly in full, unfiltered sun, only needing full sun once mature. Soil should stay moist but well drained, and the tree should never fully dry out during its first season. Pawpaw is not self-fertile, so 2 genetically different trees are required for fruit, and even then, the flowers rely on flies rather than bees for pollination, which means some growers hand-pollinate for a reliable crop. Grafted trees typically take 3 to 5 years to bear, seedlings considerably longer. But once a pawpaw establishes, it asks for almost nothing: no spraying, minimal pest pressure, and a fruit with no real shelf life, which is exactly why you will never find it in a grocery store, and exactly why the only way to taste one is to grow it yourself.
Number 2. Dwarf peach. Peach has always been the fruit tree people want and hesitate to plant, intimidated by stories of pruning schedules and pest pressure that sound more complicated than they actually are. Dwarf varieties have quietly removed most of that intimidation, staying under 8 feet while still producing full-sized, full-flavored fruit, which has pulled peach back into small yards and even large containers. Peach performs best in zones 5 through 9, and August planting places a young tree in a genuinely favorable position: warm soil for root growth, followed by a dormant winter that peach trees actually require in order to flower properly the following spring. Give it the sunniest, most open position in the yard, since poor air circulation is one of the leading causes of the fungal issues that give peach its difficult reputation. Well-drained soil matters more here than almost anywhere else on this list. Peach roots are notably intolerant of wet conditions. Most peach varieties are self-fertile, so 1 tree is enough to fruit. The real work happens in the first 2 years, when annual pruning to an open, vase-like shape sets up the framework for every future harvest, a task worth learning early rather than avoiding. Expect your first meaningful crop within 2 to 3 years. Once a dwarf peach hits its stride, it rewards that early effort with a harvest that grocery store peaches, picked hard and shipped unripe, simply cannot compete with. Number 3. Dwarf Meyer lemon. Container citrus has exploded across the US over the last several years, and Dwarf Meyer lemon sits at the center of that shift, mostly because it solves a problem gardeners in colder states assumed was unsolvable: growing your own citrus without living somewhere warm year-round. Sweeter and less acidic than a true lemon, with thin, fragrant skin, Meyer lemon has become the patio citrus of choice precisely because it tolerates container life better than almost any other citrus variety. It's reliably hardy outdoors only in zones 9 and 10. Everywhere else, it lives in a pot and comes inside for winter. August planting into a container gives the tree a full stretch of warm weather to root into its new pot before that move indoors. Use a well-draining citrus-specific potting mix, never garden soil, and choose a container with real drainage holes, since citrus roots rot quickly in standing water. Place it in the sunniest spot available, 6 or more hours of direct light, and bring it inside near a bright window once nighttime temperatures approach 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Meyer lemon is self-fertile, so a single tree will produce fruit on its own, sometimes within the first year if you purchase a tree with some maturity already on it. The trade-off for that convenience is attentiveness. Container citrus needs more consistent watering and feeding than an in-ground tree, but in exchange, it gives you fresh lemons from a pot that never technically needed a garden at all. Number 4. Dwarf Asian pear. Asian pear occupies a strange space in most people's minds. It looks like an apple, eats like a pear, and somehow ends up ignored by growers who assume it's more complicated than it actually is. Dwarf and columnar varieties have changed that, shrinking a tree that once needed real orchard space down to something that fits comfortably against a fence or in a large container. It grows well across zones 4 through 9, and August planting gives a young tree time to establish before its first real test, which is winter dormancy. A tree with strong roots going into that dormancy comes out of it noticeably stronger the following spring. Plant in full sun with well-drained soil, and stake young trees loosely for their first year, since the crisp, dense fruit that makes Asian pear appealing also makes mature branches surprisingly heavy. Most Asian pear varieties are not self-fertile and need a second variety nearby, ideally another Asian pear or a compatible European pear blooming at the same time. Fire blight is the one real risk to watch for, so avoid heavy nitrogen fertilizer that pushes soft, vulnerable new growth. Expect fruit within 2 to 3 years on a grafted dwarf tree. The result, when it finally arrives, is a fruit with almost no weight after picking. Crisp, juicy, and ready to eat the moment it comes off the branch.
Number 5. Dwarf fig. Fig has become the single most talked about fruit tree in gardening social media in the last few years, and unlike most trends, this one is backed by a genuinely good reason. Figs are one of the few fruit trees that will happily fruit in a container on a city balcony. Dwarf and compact varieties have made that possible, turning a tree that once needed a Mediterranean climate into something growers in far colder zones now bring indoors for winter and back outside every spring. Figs are reliably hardy in the ground in zones 7 through 10. In colder zones, plant on a container you can move indoors or heavy winter protection. Planting in August won't give you fruit this season. A fig fruits from buds that form on the current year's wood, or, on some varieties, on wood that survived the previous winter, so the real payoff is a tree that spends the rest of the warm season rooting in and setting itself up to fruit next year. Give it the sunniest spot available, at least 6 hours of direct light and soil that drains well, since fig roots are notably prone to rot in standing water. Figs are self-fertile, so one tree is all you need. The learning curve with fig isn't the growing, it's the harvesting. A fig only ripens on the tree and won't sweeten further once picked, so the difference between a good fig and a forgettable one often comes down to waiting exactly one more day.
Number 6. Cornelian cherry. Cornelian cherry is not actually a cherry. and most people who plant one for the first time do so entirely by accident, drawn in by early spring flowers before they realize what the tree becomes by late summer. It's a dogwood, a small tree rather than a shrub once mature, and the tart, cherry-red fruit that follows those spring flowers has quietly built a following among growers looking for something genuinely different from the usual backyard lineup. It's hardy across zones 4 through 8, and August planting suits it well because the tree grows slowly and deliberately, using the remaining warm season to settle roots without the stress of pushing fast top growth. It tolerates a wide range of soils, including the clay-heavy ground that frustrates growers of more delicate fruit trees, and handles both full sun and partial shade without much complaint. The fruit itself is intensely tart when first ripe, mellowing into something closer to a tart cherry-plum hybrid the longer it hangs on the tree, which is why most growers wait until the fruit nearly falls on its own before harvesting. Most varieties benefit from a second tree nearby for reliable pollination, though some are self-fertile. Expect a longer wait than most fruit on this list, often 4 to 5 years before a real harvest, but the tree asks for almost nothing in return. No spraying, little pruning, and the tolerance of neglect that few fruiting trees can match. Number 7. American persimmon. American persimmon has quietly become one of the most searched native fruit trees in the country. Driven by a growing interest in foraging and native plant landscaping that treats a productive tree and an ornamental one as the same thing. Unlike the Asian persimmons sold in grocery stores, the American variety is smaller, sweeter once fully ripe, and astringent enough to turn your mouth inside out if you eat it even one day too early. It's hardy across zones 4 through 9. August planting gives the tree time to develop its long taproot before winter, which matters because persimmons resent being moved once that root is established, so getting the position right now saves years of regret later. Choose a spot in full sun with room to grow. Mature trees can reach 30 feet, though grafted dwarf varieties stay considerably smaller. Persimmons are more forgiving of poor soil than most fruit trees on this list, but they won't tolerate consistently wet roots. Many American persimmon varieties need a male and female tree to fruit, so check the variety carefully before assuming one tree is enough. Patience is non-negotiable here. Seedling trees can take 6 to 10 years to bear, while grafted varieties cut that wait significantly. The reward is a fruit that ripens after the leaves drop, hanging like small orange lanterns on a bare tree, at a point in fall when almost nothing else in the garden is producing anything at all.
Number 8. Jujube. Jujube is a small tree, sometimes grown as a large multi-stemmed shrub depending on how it's pruned, and it survives conditions that kill almost everything else on this list. That reputation is exactly what has pulled it out of obscurity and into backyard orchards across the drier parts of the country. Hardy in zones 6 through 9, it tolerates drought, poor soil, and searing summer heat with almost no complaint once established, which makes an August planting far less risky than it sounds. The tree uses the remaining warm weeks to anchor a deep taproot, and that taproot is the reason Jujube shrugs off dry spells that would stress a peach or an apple to the point of dropping fruit. The fruit itself confuses first-time growers, crisp and apple-like when picked green, then wrinkled, chewy, and date-like as it fully ripens, which is why some growers harvest twice, once for each texture. Give it full sun and well-drained soil, and avoid overwatering since it's far more likely to suffer from too much attention than too little. Most varieties are self-fertile, though yields improve with a second tree nearby. Jujube grows slowly at first while it builds that taproot, then accelerates once established, often bearing within 2 to 3 years. It's not a tree that needs coddling, it's a tree that needs to be left alone.
Number 9. Pomegranate. Pomegranate has spent the last decade shifting from a purely southern climate crop to something gardeners several zones colder are now attempting, thanks to cold-hardy cultivars bred to survive winters that would have killed the plant a generation ago. Some of these newer varieties push reliable hardiness up into Zone 7, occasionally Zone 6 with protection. That shift is exactly why it belongs on this list. An August planting gives a young pomegranate roughly 2 to 3 months of warm soil before dormancy, which is the single biggest factor in whether it survives its first winter north of its traditional range. Pomegranates want full sun, at least 6 hours a day, and soil that drains well. They tolerate poor soil far better than they tolerate wet roots. In the first year, focus entirely on root establishment rather than fruit, and remove any flowers that appear so the plant's energy goes underground instead of into fruit it can't yet support. Mulch heavily around the base before the first frost, especially in marginal climates, since the crown is more vulnerable than the mature wood. Most pomegranates are self-fertile, though a second plant nearby will noticeably improve fruit set. It takes 2 to 3 years before a meaningful harvest arrives, but pomegranate genuinely improves in flavor with a longer wait, developing deeper color and sweetness as the plant matures.
Number 10. Everbearing mulberry. Ask anyone who grew up with a mulberry tree in the yard, and they'll tell you the same story. Stained hands, stained sidewalks, and more fruit than any one household could use. Everbearing dwarf varieties have turned that memory into something people are deliberately planting again, this time in containers on patios or as a compact specimen tree in a small yard. Mulberry is hardy across zones 4 through 9, and unlike the old towering trees that dropped fruit for exactly 3 weeks in June, everbearing varieties can produce in flushes from summer well into fall, which is part of why they've found a second life among small space growers. August planting suits mulberry well because the tree is fast growing and heat tolerant, happy to spend the rest of the warm season anchoring its roots rather than fighting spring's unpredictable cold snaps. Choose a dwarf or semi-dwarf variety if space is limited. Standard mulberries can eventually shade an entire yard. Plant well away from patios, driveways, and anywhere a fence line meets a neighbor's property, since dropped fruit stains concrete, and a mulberry in full production does not apologize for the mess it leaves behind. Water deeply through the first fall and resist the urge to prune heavily in the first year. Mulberries are self-fertile, so one tree is enough to fruit.
Number 11. Goumi berry. Goumi berry is technically a large shrub rather than a true tree, but nurseries sell it alongside fruit trees because it fills the same role in a home orchard. If nitrogen-fixing plants sound like something only permaculture forums talk about, Goumi is the plant quietly proving the idea works in an ordinary backyard. Its roots host bacteria that pull nitrogen from the air and feed it into the surrounding soil, which is why experienced growers plant Goumi near hungrier fruit trees like apples or pears, using it as a living fertilizer source. The berries themselves are small, silver-speckled, and startlingly tart until fully ripe, when they mellow into something close to a cross between a cherry and a cranberry. Hardy in zones 4 through 9, Goumi is remarkably heat-tolerant during establishment, unlike many fruiting shrubs that sulk in late summer soil, which is exactly why August planting works in its favor. Give it well-drained soil, since Goumi dislikes wet feet more than almost anything else on this list, and full sun for the heaviest fruiting. Most varieties are self-fertile, so a single plant will still produce, though 2 nearby will increase yield. It fruits shockingly early for a shrub, often within 2 years of planting, with the harvest arriving in early summer, ahead of nearly everything else on this list.
Number 12. Elderberry. Elderberry closes this list, and like Goumi, it's technically a large shrub rather than a tree, though it's sold in the fruit tree section for good reason. It behaves like one once mature, with a woody trunk and a canopy that can reach 10 feet. What's pushed elderberry's popularity over the last few years is immune support syrup culture. Every fall, the same berries that once fell forgotten in hedgerows are now selling out at farmers markets before October even starts.
Hardy across zones 3 through 9, it's one of the most cold-tolerant plants on this entire list, and an August planting gives the roots time to settle before the first frost without asking the plant to push new top growth it can't yet support. Elderberries need consistent moisture for the first 6 weeks, a full sun to part shade position, and critically, 2 different varieties planted within 50 feet of each other. A single elderberry will flower generously and produce almost nothing. 2 varieties cross-pollinating is the difference between an ornamental shrub and the harvest that fills a bucket. Do not eat the berries raw or in large quantities. They need to be cooked. Once established, expect the first real harvest in the 2nd or 3rd year, and after that, a plant that asks for almost nothing and gives back every single fall.
August is not too late for a fruit tree, as long as you know which ones actually want to go in now versus which ones are better off waiting for a dormant season planting this fall. You don't need all 12 of these in your yard. Pick 2 or 3 that fit your zone, your space, and how patient you're willing to be while you wait for that first harvest. If you only have a balcony, Dwarf Meyer lemon or a container fig will get you started. If you have real ground to work with, Pawpaw and persimmon reward the wait more than almost anything else you could plant. Which one of these are you planting first? Tell us in the comments along with your growing zone, and subscribe for more ways to make the most of every planting season your yard has left to give.